so many people struggle with self-confidence for whatever reason. And we identified together that it was really my superpowers that let me move forward throughout my life.
Hi, welcome back to Let Me Ask You Something, the weekly podcast where I, MD Pittman, talk to everyday ordinary people about something extraordinary in their lives. This week I talked to Gayle Petrillo. She is a burn victim. When she was a toddler, she was severely burned. About 40% of her body was covered in third-degree burns, and she talks about that experience, about why she didn't talk about it for so long until most recently when she was in her mid-60s, and she's written a book about it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Gayle Petrillo.
We are live. We are on episode 3 of season 2 of the Let Me Ask You podcast, and I'm going to mispronounce your name because I always mispronounce names. Gayle Petrillo?
Petrillo.
Petrillo. I was close.
Yeah.
I was close.
You were very close. Good job.
Great. Well, Gayle, you are a burn survivor. So let me ask you something, Gayle. How did you get burns over 40% of your body?
Well, so as a toddler, I was 2.5, and my mom had taken me to an adult women tea party. And we were at Neighbors, with a group of kids, and we were outside playing in the leaves, and we could smell cookies baking in the oven through the screen door. Yeah. And we came in, and as I climbed up on the table, I could see there were little teacups for hot chocolate for the kids, coffee and tea for the adults, and goodies sprinkled all over the table. So as I tried to climb up, it was a very high sort of picnic table type of table in the kitchen, and it had benches on one side and chairs on the other. They had a big family. And so I put my elbows on top of the table to help boost me. And as I did so, I reached and pulled a fresh pot of coffee off the table and all over me.
Wow. You sound like you were a rambunctious little girl.
I will say I was a girly girl who loved people, loved learning new things. And after the accident, obviously my life was changed in a moment's notice, and I became fearful of everyone and everything.
Oh, wow. So what happened after that accident? I guess take me to what you were told and what you remember from when you got burned to, I assume you went straight to the hospital.
Yes. So there was no 911 at that point in time. This was the mid-1950s. And so the home we were at, the woman was a nurse, which was fortunate in one way and unfortunate in another, because she knew in her mind the best thing would be to strip the clothes off this little girl. And as she was doing so, she stripped the skin away. So, yeah. So they called my pediatrician, who met us at the ER. We sort of give him kudos for actually saving my life. I was in the hospital for a number of months. My parents did not know if I would live or die. Burns were treated very differently back then. They treated with radiation and steroid injections. And I really have very little recollection of much of that immediacy around the accident. I do have some recollections of being in the pediatrician's office after and getting steroid injections in my burns to help them heal. But other than that, I mean, it was sort of in the day, you put your big girl pants on and you and your parents went on with life. And so that's what we did. We never talked about the incident. It took me, so I sort of just grew up, and even in my early career days, never shared the accident with anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm now 67 and just started sharing my story in the last 12 months.
Wow. So what is that like, living with a secret, but not so secret?
Yeah. As you can imagine, we all have secrets. We all get burned either physically and or emotionally. And so growing up with burns on 40% or scars on 40% of your body, you know, it is interesting, I guess I would say, because I always saw myself from the outside in, thinking others would see me as deformed and whatnot, the way I saw myself. However, other people cannot see my scars. They're hidden under my clothing. So in that regard, I guess I would say I'm fortunate. But being a burn survivor, I am learning. Obviously, the fears and phobias that I struggled with all through life were part of PTSD.
Yeah.
All burn survivors struggle with some form of PTSD. Burns are lifelong. Scars are lifelong. And so that's why there's PTSD involved. And so I struggled with body image issues. I was bullied. I had a severe lack of self-confidence. I always felt different. And it took me years into my mid-adulthood to get comfortable in my own skin.
Wow. So with the burns, I mean, as a 2.5-year-old, 40% of your body is a lot different mass as far as area than as an adult. So did those burns grow? I mean, did they expand as you grew up, or did they stay kind of a smaller amount? Is it more like 25% of your body as opposed to 40% when you were 2.5?
Yeah, I don't know technically from a medical perspective what physicians would say about that, but in my opinion, it's probably 25% of my adult body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So with this, I guess, what type of therapy did you go through? I mean, obviously you went through the treatment, but I mean, were you treated as far as later on how to live with these burns? Or, I mean, you said that you didn't talk about it. I mean, do you go through therapy now with it, or what's the, I guess, what's going on?
Yeah. So I did not undergo therapy at any time during my childhood or young adulthood. I just dealt with my insecurities, my fears and phobias. I started dealing with it really when we moved to Arizona, which was about 23 years ago. One of my greatest phobias is that of snakes. It's irrational. I'd never been bitten by a snake, whatever. And it's not really related specifically to the burns, but I knew coming out here to the desert, I would undoubtedly run into snakes. And so I found a grad student at the University of New York at Albany who was doing his thesis on phobias and working with people with severe phobia. And it was supposed to be a 6-week class, one-on-one. It was on a sliding scale. And so I was going to pay him like $60 or whatever for the 6-week course. I wound up working with him for over 4 months. Went from everything from touching a picture book with a snake in it, which I couldn't do.
Oh, wow.
To, like serious. To playing with a rubber snake, which I couldn't do for weeks and months.
Oh.
I would bring the rubber snake home, and it was in a paper bag, actually. And my husband's like, "What's in the bag? Did you bring your lunch?" And I said, "No, there's a rubber snake in the bag." He said, "Well, take it out." I said, "I can't." So he took it out of the bag, put it on the living room side table, coffee table. And my homework for that week was to pick up the snake and play with it, rubber snake, mind you. And I couldn't do it. My husband would hand it to me and it would drop to the floor. So my husband, being the smart man that he is, said, "Let's think about this. It's rubber. What else is rubber?" So he took me to the garage and I would touch the rubber tire and touch the rubber snake. And that's how I overcame that.
Wow.
And what I learned through those months is that the way you outgrow and overcome any kind of fear and phobia is through repetition. So I will share that I actually graduated by being able to pick up a beautiful orange corn snake that belonged to this grad student. His name was Max, not the grad student. I don't remember his name, but Max was the snake. And I got to the point where I could have him in his terrarium at my feet, open the cover, reach in, take him out, wrap him around my arm, let him look at me, and then unwrap him and put him back.
Wow. From not even being able to touch the picture to that is unbelievable. So how does that? So with the phobias, is that something that you were able to relate to overcoming with the fear of talking about the accident, the fear of the accident?
Yeah. So let me back up for a second, Mike, and just say, among some of my other fears and phobias, which are more rational when you think about a burn survivor, right? So to light what do you call it when you light a stove? Gas stoves sometimes. Nowadays they don't, but they used to have
the pilot light.
The pilot light. Thank you. Yeah. So years ago, to light a pilot light with a match, I couldn't do that.
Okay.
So I only tried to cook on electric.
Okay.
Now, fortunately, there's automatic pilot lights, and I can use the gas stove. I actually love cooking on them, but to this day, I won't light a match.
Wow.
Can't hold a sparkler. None of that. Nothing with flame. I can't do that. So, back to your question, and I'll ask you to repeat it. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. So how does overcoming the what you learned from overcoming that fear of snakes to the fear of revealing and talking about your burns?
Right. So what that phobia course taught me was it gave me tools that I could use and that I share in my book to help when you get into a situation. So, for instance, crossing bridges on foot or in cars was another irrational fear. And when you're in that situation, sometimes it comes up to you very quickly. You don't have time to react. So I've learned to take a deep breath, to breathe through it, and get yourself through that situation safely. So I've used those for other things. As far as coming out with sharing my story, I wouldn't ever say it was a fear that held me back. Mm-hmm. I didn't know I was fearful of sharing it. I just never knew I wanted to share it.
Okay.
And so about 4.5 years ago, I launched my own business. I'm a career coach. My business, First Impressions, was launched about 4.5 years ago. And when I did it, it was mostly going to be image consulting. And so I launched my business with a fashion show. And I held it in 2018 and a second one in 2019. Both years, the beneficiary of the fundraiser was Beads of Courage, a local but nationally recognized not-for-profit. So year 2, I was backstage talking to the founder, and she travels the world, and I always ask her when I see her, where have you been? And she surprised me, and she said I hadn't been traveling lately. She said, in fact, I just spent 3 days working with burn survivors in Maricopa, which is north of us in Phoenix.
Okay.
Something came over me. I was about to say something, and the MC was calling me to the podium. So I just left backstage and stood in front of the podium. There were about 200 people in the audience. I'll say I knew 185 of them. The only person who knew my story at that point was my husband.
Yeah.
And I stood at the podium and I found tears were just streaming down my face. And I looked at the audience and I apologized and I wiped my eyes. And I said, I'm so sorry. I said, I was backstage talking to Jean and I'll bring her out in a minute. But she was sharing that she just spent 3 days with burn survivors. I wish my family and I had that kind of support when I was burned as a child. Well, you could literally hear a pin drop in this room with, cups and silverware and, dead silence. And a second or two passed. It seemed like several minutes. And I just went on with the fashion show. Afterwards, I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, what? Who's this girl that's talking to us? You never told me. I said, well, I never told anybody.
Yeah.
And one woman who I knew by reputation but had never met came up to me and said, you have a story to tell. I said, no, I really don't. She said, well, I think you do, and I think we need to talk about it. I said, great. I'm happy to find out more about you. Let's go to coffee. Fast forward, we went for several cups of coffee, several glasses of wine over the next 3.5 months, and she got my story out of me. And she said, you need to share this. People need to hear of this courage, of this, it will resonate with so many people.
Well, what about your story appealed to her? What can you say what really attracted her, your story? What attracted her to your story?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what attracted her was the fact it amazed her that I'd kept this hidden for so many years.
Like, how old were you at this time when you finally came out and talked about it?
66.
Oh, so last year.
67. Yeah, 60. Okay. It was actually, I shared my story with her in December of 2019.
Okay.
In January of 2020, my sister and I planned an excursion to visit my mom in Florida over dinner and wine. I know I sound like an alcoholic. I'm not. Over dinner and wine one night in Florida. My sister flew down from upstate New York. I flew from Arizona. We had a girls' 10-day weekend, whatever, vacation. And I said over dinner one night to my mom and my sister, someone back in Arizona has asked me to share my story. What do you guys think of it? And my mother, I love her to death, she just turned 88, said, what story? And I'm like, the fact that I was burned and I survived and I've dealt with all of these traumas for years. And she said, oh, well, if you think that'll help people, I think it's great. And my sister, who is a ghostwriter, she's a marketing PR person. Yeah. She's like, what do you need from me to help support you in this endeavor?
Yeah.
So I went home, and within weeks, COVID hit and everything shut down. So I walked in my husband's office one day. He's a journalist by trade and a writer. He's written a few books as well, novels. I said, Al, how do you write a book? And he sort of looked at me oddly and he said, just sit at the computer and start typing. I said, okay. And I walked out of his office and I sat at my computer and I literally started typing. And what he added as he walked into my office to see what I was doing, he said, don't worry about a beginning, middle, or end. Don't worry about a title. Just type. And I found it so cathartic.
Yeah.
And within a few days, it might have been a few weeks, I went to him and I said, look at this, 60,000 words.
Oh,
he's
wow.
like, what?
Within a few days?
Yeah, I just sat there and just typed. And he read it and he said, I'm too close to this to edit it, but this looks really good. Let's send it to a friend of ours who's a professional editor. Mm-hmm. And so Lynn read it over and she's like, this is a book. Mm-hmm. And that, as they say, is the beginning of the history, right?
Yeah.
So it was just published March 1st, which is my birthday of this year.
All right.
So she was intrigued. Kathy was intrigued with the fact that I had kept it hidden for so long. Also with the fact that, everybody, well, all right, let me rephrase that. Many people, particularly girls and women, struggle with body image, right? Yes. You look at who the models are. Now, things have changed a lot, obviously. They have larger girls. They have diverse girls modeling. But that wasn't always the case. You had to look like a Barbie doll, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody wanted that.
Which was literally unrealistic because the proportions are not in any reality.
No, totally. And, of course, my body image issues were different because of the scars. Mm-hmm. But so many people struggle with self-confidence for whatever reason. And we identified together that it was really my superpowers that let me move forward throughout my life. And the superpowers are such that you use the tools in your toolbox, like noticing how you're breathing when you're handed a sparkler unexpectedly, when you cross a bridge that you didn't expect to have to cross.
Yeah.
Right. All the things that you fight with that, fear or flight, right, kind of thing. And so your superpowers, I'm also learning, are when you struggle with self-confidence, when people compliment you, whether it's you have beautiful blue eyes, that top matches your eyes, I love that color lipstick, what you just said was really nice, whatever the compliments are, when you're in your dark environment, remember those positive compliments, because that's what helps you get through. At least in my experience.
Yeah. So what you're saying your superpowers, what superpowers are, I mean, is that what you just explained here? Or are those the details of the superpowers? Or how did you learn that you had these superpowers?
Part of it came to me when I was speaking with Kathy over several weeks and months. Part of that came to me as I was writing my book, because you can write a book and you can tell stories, but you want people to have a nugget or two to take away, right? And what better nugget, whether it's an 8th grader or an 80-year-old person reading your story, to know that they too have superpowers, right?
Yeah. So now I know you're an author. I mean, and you're a coach here. Do you do any speaking engagements? Have you started doing that, or are you planning on doing that?
I have started doing that, and I think right now, as things open up, although with the variant coming back, things are shutting down again. But once we get back to whatever our new normal will be, I would very much like to continue on the speaking stage, because those that have read my story, heard my story, all say that there are bits and pieces of it that they all resonate with. And again, whether it's young kids struggling with whatever they're going through as a child, a preteen, a teen, whatever, to adults, there's something in that story, in my story, that will help people. And so I think I'm motivated to share the story now because I've heard from others that they're empowered by my story, which just floors me. It was not a planned thing. It just happened.
Now, when you were writing your story and revisiting a lot of this past, was there anything that surprised you?
Good question. Yeah, some of what surprised me actually was feeling that weight lifted off my shoulders. As I said, writing it was very cathartic. I had no idea what it would be like writing and remembering and getting those triggers, learning myself for the most part how to overcome those. What a success story that I didn't see as success when I was in the throes of it. And to look back after, I went to high school and graduated and went to a 2-year tech school, became a medical secretary. I was identified early on by some people. I had no idea where they got this idea, but they identified me as an up-and-comer with potential. So they sent me to some Dale Carnegie courses. They sent me to the Disney training. That started my transition into being who I am today. But there was so much more. I've been so fortunate to be surrounded by supportive people, family and colleagues and friends. So looking, we all go through life and we all look back and think, oh, that was difficult or that was wonderful. I never really, so I guess I'll say, after I wrote my book and learned that I am a burn survivor, that has gone through PTSD due to trauma, I started researching where I would find people like me. And so there are a ton of Facebook support groups through the Arizona Burn Foundation, through the Phoenix Burn Society, which is based out of the Midwest. And I reached out to the Arizona Burn Foundation because I'm in Tucson and they're in Phoenix. And I started corresponding on LinkedIn with their chief operating officer, Mick. And he said, you should look at helping others beyond writing your story. We have a program that is a SOAR, SOAR, peer support program. And so I looked into it and I actually became certified. And it's along the coaching lines in that when survivors get to the point that they're ready to share their story, sometimes they need encouragement, sometimes they just need an ear to listen to them and to share with them my experience so that they know they're not alone. And so I've been doing that. And what I've learned through that is through sharing and listening, I'm healing, and so are others.
So you're basically providing stuff that you probably wished you would have had. I mean, this is something that you're paying it forward and making sure people, yes, they're going to have PTSD, but maybe not as severe.
Right. And we learn through that SOAR support program, it's an actual certification. And through that training, you learn that burn survivors all heal at different times. And even once you believe that you're healed, your physical scars have healed, your emotional scars take much more time sometimes. And even once you think you're cured emotionally, things happen that bring you back in time. You either meet another survivor or a victim, or you hear a story, or you're triggered by something. And so, yes, it certainly would have been helpful to my parents, my sister, and myself to have had someone to talk to, someone to explain what to expect as you go through different phases of your life, through childhood, through teenage years, through adulthood. It's just, so it is paying it forward, I guess. I don't think of it intentionally that way, but that's what it is. And I love this saying by Robin Sharma. It's turn your hurt into healing, your wounds into wisdom, and your pain into power. Yeah. And I believe that that's what I'm doing.
That's a great sentiment there. What advice we've had, this basically has been full of advice and suggestions, but what's your elevator pitch to somebody who is a burn survivor or knows somebody? What would you tell them if you had 30 seconds to help them get help?
Great question. So my 30 seconds would be, I'm here, reach out. When you're ready, there are so many people there to support you, from healthcare providers, right? The physicians, the nurses, other support in the hospital. But also once you get home, you're going to need, and your family are going to need so much support that you don't even recognize right now. Don't isolate. It's the first thing we all do is isolate. Don't do it. Reach out for help. Reach out to me. Reach out to others. Arizona Burn Foundation, Phoenix Burn Society. Reach out on Facebook to support groups, peer groups. You are not alone. Don't isolate.
Well, with that isolation, as you said, that's kind of a natural tendency to, if you have a physical deformity, to isolate yourself. How do you, if somebody does that, do you just basically stay in constant communication with them? I mean, you don't want to harass them to any level, but I mean, what's that fine line between encouragement and harassment?
Right. So what we're taught actually is when they're ready, they will seek us out.
Yeah.
And so once they seek us out, we're there really to listen and to share. But not to harass, certainly not.
Yeah.
So there's a gal I know in Toronto that reached out through another mutual associate, I guess you would say, a mutual burn survivor. And she reached out twice. I spoke to her. I told her what she was doing really well with. I told her what I have done. She reached out twice, and now it's been a few weeks. I haven't heard from her. So I tweaked her through email, just, hey, hope you're doing okay. I'm here.
So
that's it until she's ready. Yes.
Yeah, be a friend. That's
yes.
I mean, we should be friends anyways. I mean, that's something that no matter what, just check on everybody, see how everybody's doing, because you never know what their mental health state is. They could put up a good front, but behind the eyes, it could be a whole lot of a lot going on that could overwhelm them. So
exactly.
All right. Well, great. Well, any final words of parting advice or words of wisdom that you have, Gayle?
Not that I can think of.
You said a lot.
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Gayle, I appreciate the time, and thank you very much for being on my podcast.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right.